I had always thought that summer camp was only about campfires, late-night songs, and exciting games. But the summer of 1977 was different. Something I had never experienced in all my years as a camp counselor awaited us. Our camp was set deep in the forests of Oklahoma, where the tall, thick trees cast heavy shadows on the ground, and the sound of the wind through the branches always carried with it a strange sense of loneliness. The kids were cheerful. Their laughter and shouts filled the air, while I, as one of the senior counselors, was responsible for keeping order and watching over their safety. When we arrived, we set up the tents. Each group had its own responsibilities, and I explained the camp's paths and the safe boundaries. But when night fell and the fire was lit, something hung in the air. Something I couldn't quite name, but my whole being could feel it. That day, the children were so excited that they didn't notice me staring into the dark forest, following a strange shadow that seemed to move among the trees, though no one was there. That very first night, the old rumors I had heard about the forest came back to me. The locals said that years ago, children and teenagers had disappeared from other camps nearby. Some even claimed that their cries could still be heard on certain nights. I had always dismissed those stories as local folklore, until that night. After dinner, the children gathered around the fire and began singing. I sat beside them, but my eyes were fixed on the forest. The wind blew, and the branches clashed with an eerie, hollow sound. Suddenly, I heard something. Slow, deliberate footsteps on dry leaves. I glanced at the children, but no one else seemed to hear it. One of the boys, Tom, lifted his head and said, "Maybe it's an animal, Mr. Jones." But I knew better. An animal's steps weren't this steady, this purposeful. It was like a person walking. A few minutes later, the sky grew darker, and the kids returned to their tents. I remained by the fire, listening intently. The footsteps continued, now sounding closer. My heart began to pound, but I forced myself to stay calm. That night, when I finally returned to my tent, I found something strange on the ground. Broken branches scattered right at the entrance, as if someone or something had been examining my path. There were no footprints, no sign of anyone. By morning, everything seemed normal. The kids were cheerful, and I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. But deep down I knew this summer would not be like the others. There was something in those woods we hadn't yet discovered. And as a counselor, it was my duty to protect the children, even if I had no idea what I was up against. And that was only the beginning. On the second night at camp, the uneasy feeling grew stronger. The kids were still lively, brushing it off as my imagination, but I knew something was moving out there. It all began at dusk. The air was fresh, the evening pleasant, but the wind rattled the dry branches with a loud, unsettling noise. The children were playing soccer in the field while I sat on a bench, checking the attendance sheet. Suddenly, I heard the sound again, leaves crunching in the forest. At first, I thought it might be a rabbit, maybe a raccoon, but the sound had rhythm. Steps. Human steps. My heart raced. My hand instinctively went to my pocket knife, though I knew it was hardly enough for protection. I looked at the kids. None of them seemed to notice. The steps drew closer, coming from paths that didn't even exist. Moments later, one of the boys, Jeff, suddenly shouted, "Mr. Jones, did you hear that too?" I turned to him. His face was pale, frightened. "I heard it, Jeff." "Yes," I answered, trying to sound calm, not wanting fear to spread among the children. Afterward, we led the kids back to their tents to get ready for bed. On the path, I saw fresh branches broken on the ground, just like the night before, but this time arranged more deliberately, as though someone was tracking us. When we finally reached the tents, the kids zipped themselves inside. The lanterns went out, and I sat once again near the fire, casting my final watchful glances into the shadows. The wind picked up, whistling harshly through the trees, and the sound of snapping branches echoed from deep within the woods. Suddenly, I heard a short, sharp scream. I thought perhaps one of the children had seen something in their tent, but when I pulled back the flap to look inside, there was no one there. I slept poorly, haunted by terrible nightmares that filled the night. Sounds rising from the forest, shadows slipping between the trees, and the unshakable feeling that something was watching us left me restless. The next morning, as the children gathered for breakfast, I noticed one of the tents was slightly open. It belonged to the group of teenage girls, and when I looked inside, the place was a mess. Pillows and sleeping bags were scattered everywhere, but the girls themselves were gone. There were no footprints, no signs of where they had gone. That moment was the first undeniable sign of what awaited us. Something, or someone, was inside the camp, and it wasn't just watching us. It was anticipating our every move, waiting for the right moment to act. During the day, I spoke with the other counselors. They insisted my imagination was running wild, but I knew what I had seen was real. Even the kids could sense there was something wrong with the forest, though they couldn't put it into words. By the third night, the strange events escalated. The children were asleep, and I began my nightly patrol around the camp. As I passed by the tents, I heard underground whispers, soft, eerie murmurs. At first, I thought the wind was slipping through the tents, but as I moved closer, I realized the whispers were synchronized, as though someone was speaking the children's names. I switched on my flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. Something moved between them, a tall, thin shadow that vanished with every step, slipping in and out of sight. No face, no clothing, just a shadow, but its presence was real, undeniable. That night, more than ever before, I felt the camp was no longer safe. Something among us wanted to feed on our fear, to weave both mystery and terror into our lives. On that third night, dread reached its peak. The children slept in their tents while I walked the dry ground, flashlight in hand, each step crunching on broken twigs. Every few minutes, a new rustle echoed from the forest, closer, heavier than before. Then I heard it, a distant cry, like nothing I had ever heard from a child. At first, I thought one of the campers was having a nightmare, but the sound was continuous, growing louder. A chilling dread spread through me. I rushed toward the sound, flashing my light through the trees. Again, I caught a glimpse of it, the tall, narrow shadow, darting quickly, always just beyond my reach. The cry shifted into a shrill scream. The closer I went, the clearer it became. Suddenly, my flashlight went out. Darkness swallowed everything. I could hear only my own breathing and the crunch of branches beneath the shadow's unseen steps. My heart pounded wildly. After several tense seconds, the light flickered back on, but the shadow was gone. I hurried back toward the tents, intent on waking the children. Tom, one of the boys, jolted upright, eyes wide with terror. "Mr. Jones, something in the forest." I saw it. I tried to steady my voice. "Don't be afraid, Tom. It might have been an animal, or just the trees moving." But I knew it was nothing of the sort. Whatever was stalking us was no animal. It wasn't even human. That night, the strange noises grew constant. The children, panicked, began running out of their tents. Some claimed they had seen shadows. Others swore they heard whispers. I tried to gather them together, calming them, though the fear spreading among them was seeping into me as well. Suddenly, a scream pierced the camp. Linda, one of the girls, stood frozen, pointing at the forest. She said a shadow had been standing right outside her tent before vanishing into the trees. We shone our lights, but saw nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign of anyone. It was then I realized we were facing something truly dangerous. Something that could move through the dark unseen, leaving no trace, terrifying us one by one. By midnight, I decided to gather everyone in one place, close to the fire, where the light was stronger and the safe paths easier to reach. But even there, the shadows played with us. Every time the flashlights flicked on, they darted away. Every time the light went out, they crept closer. When dawn finally came, everyone was exhausted and shaken. Some even trembled with fever, not from the cold, but from the terror of the night before. I swore to myself that I would never again let anything come near the children, even if it meant searching every corner of the forest myself. But this was only the beginning. What happened on the third night was just a prelude to what awaited us. It was the moment that stole the camp's sense of safety, and each passing day painted the shadows of fear across the forest darker and darker. On the fourth night, everything changed in a chilling way. The children no longer laughed, and they refused to leave their tents, not even to go to the restroom. The fear of the past nights hung over everyone, and I, as the senior counselor, felt a heavy weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Around 10 o'clock that night, Linda, the same girl who had seen the shadow the night before, disappeared. At first, we didn't notice. Her tent in the girls' group appeared to be closed. But when we checked the roll, her absence was undeniable. We immediately turned on the lights and began searching. Once again, the crack of branches echoed in the distance, but this time there were no footprints. Even Linda's own steps, which should have left marks in the dirt, were gone, as if she had vanished into thin air. I shouted her name. "Linda, where are you?" There was no answer. Only a short scream cut through the night, impossible to trace to a single direction. We ran toward the sound, and every time we raised our flashlights, a quick shadow darted between the trees before vanishing again. Minutes later, we reached the small spring near the camp. Freshly broken branches, just like in the previous nights, lined the way. But again, no footprints, no trace of a human presence. My heart pounded in my chest. I knew something was toying with us, something that could take the children away completely and leave no sign behind. At that moment, one of the boys, Tom, whispered, "Mr. Jones, it's behind the trees." I fixed my eyes on the dark woods, but saw nothing, just shifting shadows, blackness swallowing everything. The children's breathing quickened. I could see the terror in their eyes. With great effort, we gathered the group and tried to find the path back to the tents. But it was as though the forest had changed. Paths that had been clear and simple the day before were now twisted, deceptive. Every step led us back to where we had already been. Hours passed, but there was still no sign of Linda. I tried to stay calm for the children's sake, but fear gnawed at me as well. Something in those woods was breaking the laws of nature, something capable of threatening the children's lives at any moment. By morning, Linda was still missing. The group was devastated and terrified. Parents and local authorities were contacted, and a massive search began, but nothing was found. Only broken branches and strange shadows remained in the forest. That was the first true blow. Until then, everything had only been warnings and strange signs, but now a real person, a teenage girl, had vanished. Real fear and horror had descended upon the camp, and I knew this was only the start of our summer nightmare. By the fifth night, everything had changed beyond repair. What had once been strange noises and fleeting shadows became a true scene of terror. The shadows were no longer indirect. They were actively pursuing us. After dinner, the children tried to play together to ease the stress of the past days, but even the lanterns hanging from the tents couldn't drive back the forest's darkness. I sat on the bench, watching over them, when suddenly a piercing scream shattered the air. Susie, one of the girls, was gone. At first, I thought she had gone to the restroom, but when I followed with my flashlight, I saw it, something black and swift moving between the trees. A shadow that was neither human nor animal. Its movements were unnatural, rapid, and it carried Susie's screams with it into the night. The children began to cry, their fears spreading into me. I need to gather them, quickly, I told myself, but the forest paths were changing again. Every time I moved forward, I found myself back where I had started. Something in the woods was breaking the natural order. Moments later, 3 more, Tom, Jeff, and Linda, vanished while screaming in terror. Only their clothes remained on the ground, fresh blood staining the branches and leaves. No trace of the shadow, no sign of the creature, as if everything had disappeared in the blink of an eye. I struggled desperately to gather the rest of the children and lead them to safety. But in the dark, every move I made felt watched. Heavy breathing and whispers pressed closer and closer. My heart pounded violently, and my body trembled with fear. That night, I realized the killer, or the unknown creature, wasn't just trying to frighten us. It wanted to tear us apart, one by one. With every step we took, the shadows grew closer. Broken branches and strange footprints on the ground were the only signs confirming that something hidden was there. The next morning, as the sunlight poured over the camp, a horrifying scene awaited us. 3 children had been killed. Their bodies were found near the tents, tangled among broken branches. There was no trace of the killer or the strange being. Everyone fell into a suffocating silence of terror. Parents and local authorities arrived, launching extensive searches, but no clue of the creature or the murderer was ever discovered. Only the forest's dark shadows, the shattered branches, and a lingering fear remained. That night marked the climax of our terrifying summer. Whatever had been lurking in the forest from the beginning had now revealed its power, drowning the entire camp in fear and despair. As the senior guide, I was the only one still alive, and I knew this experience would never leave my mind. After that catastrophic 5th night, the camp was completely changed. The children were traumatized, and the parents deeply worried. I, as the only surviving senior counselor, carried the heavy burden of both protecting the survivors and uncovering a truth no one dared to confront. I spoke with the survivors and learned that each of them had seen something different. Shadows, whispers, unnatural movements among the trees. But one fact was consistent. The creature, or the killer, was always hidden in the darkness, never directly seen. A few days later, when the camp's usual activities had ceased and the police presence brought a fragile sense of calm, I decided to investigate the forest myself. Armed with a flashlight and a knife, I entered the same paths where the shadows had moved in previous nights. Broken branches, bizarre footprints, and layers of wet, pressed soil showed clear signs that something unnatural had been there. In a remote corner of the forest, I discovered something that revealed the terrifying truth. An old, decayed tent from a camp long ago. Inside, I found personal belongings and weathered journals. Among the notes were the names of children who had vanished decades earlier. What was more disturbing was how the accounts mirrored our recent nights. Distant sounds, unseen shadows, sudden disappearances. From this discovery, I realized that what stalked us was not human. It was a pattern repeating itself. For years, perhaps decades, this forest had witnessed the vanishing of children and teenagers, and no one had ever identified the killer or the creature behind it. That very night, as I returned to camp, I saw a shadow at the end of the path. This time, with newfound determination, I shone my flashlight. What I saw defied description. A tall, thin figure, moving with inhuman speed, disappearing between the trees. It had no face, no voice, but its presence was undeniable, heavy, terrifying, devoid of any human emotion. This truth doubled my faith. I understood then that the survivors had almost no chance of escaping, unless by sheer luck the forest's twisted path spared them. Whatever had haunted the forest for generations, devouring children and youth, was still here. We were only its witnesses. Upon returning to camp, I resolved to move the survivors to safety and forbid anyone from entering the forest alone again. Police and local authorities did everything in their power to secure the area, but no one could explain the shadows or the disappearances. As the guide, I had witnessed how fear and horror had become a repeating history. What lurked in the forest was neither human nor animal, but some indescribable force that had claimed lives for generations and would continue to do so. This experience changed my summer and my life forever. Whenever I walk in the dark or see a forest, the shadows and the sound of cracking branches return to me. The dreadful truth of those nights is etched into me, and I know the creature still waits, somewhere in that forest, for its next victim.